All right. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast, 49ers post game edition. Wow. Niners get a win over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a score of 23-20. Came down to some late game heroics by Jake Moody. But before that, it wasn't very good. So let's get into it here. There's a few things to talk about. I'll start with the first half. All right. First half was ugly at times, but they were finding their rhythm. Defensively, I thought that the Niners were doing a really good job at disrupting the ground game that the Bucs were trying to establish early on. But the wide receivers, I guess 4 through 7, who were playing as 1 through 3 today, obviously the story going into this game was, well, there's hardly any healthy wide receivers for the Bucs. And so those wide receivers, unfortunately, were tearing up the Niners in the first half. And so, obviously that's the only thing that they could really get going. They ended the half with only 3 points on the board. So like I said, that Niners D tightened up at times, but they were definitely starting to find some success through the air. Going into the second half, the Niners, we knew, would need to take care of the ball and really try to force the Bucs to turn it over and get some momentum, because that was something that the Niners were lacking for a better part of this game. It felt like there wasn't much going, not many big plays were established in the first half for the Niners that could really build off of. So biggest thing in the first half to me was the Purdy dot to Ricky Pearsall for a touchdown. Obviously, Ricky was back 2 weeks ago for the first time in his career playing on an NFL field, and it was a special week. He had a couple big catches, but obviously he didn't end the game with anything crazy, and definitely not a touchdown. But in this one, he gets his first touchdown on honestly a beautiful ball from Purdy, right up the gut in the middle between the numbers, and finds Ricky Pearsall in some space, and Ricky just takes off from there. Ricky ended the day with 4 receptions for 73 yards and obviously the touchdown. So it was really nice to see him kind of establish some rhythm in this one and find himself as a NFL professional. I thought that his presence was felt out there, but that might have been part of the CMC effect, which I'll talk about a little bit later as I get into this. But let's talk about this second half, because this is where the game started to get interesting. So obviously the Niners going into the second half are up 10-3. The Bucs on their opening drive, their Niners hold them to 3 and out, and then they punt the ball away. And unfortunately, Jacob Cowling muffs the punt. And it was a good play by the Tampa Bay special teams. They were blocking one of our guys into Jacob Cowling, and it made it a really tough catch. And, it muffed the punt. And Tampa is then able to punch the ball in and tie the game up 10-10. So at this point, Tampa Bay has got momentum. And that's something that I talked about in the episode last week, that you don't want to give home crowds momentum. And especially here with a team that has so many injuries up and down. And in this one, losing their star all-pro left tackle and just kind of, feeling more of that injury, bug. You give them momentum now to start the second half against a team that went to the Super Bowl last year. So obviously the crowd, the players, all going to be hyped and running off that. So Niners get the ball, and at this point you have to go down and try and get some momentum back. So that drive featured a couple good runs by CMC and a couple good catches. Deebo had a really good catch in space, and it put us in the red zone. Now, this is going to be a topic for me in this one, is the red zone presence. The Niners in the red zone still are having a few issues, and I'm seeing, some of the same inconsistencies in play calling and just execution inside the red zone that I've seen all year. Obviously, this is Christian McCaffrey's first game back. It might take a few weeks for him to really get reestablished into that end of the field, because the red zone is not easy to execute in for any team. It's defenses tighten up, plays and windows are that much tighter, and everything has that much more meaning. Every play has that much more meaning. And you can't look at it as, there's times, especially when this is a tight game, you can't look at it as a 4 down. We're not the Eagles. We can't do a tush push. So it's not get up to the 1 yard line and then execute from there. It's, you got to get that first down. Otherwise you're forced with a big decision And maybe that decision isn't as big if your kicker is knocking down consistently or your team is able to execute on something like a tush push. So the Niners go down, they're in the red zone. They, on a first down throw to CMC, sets it up 1st and goal. So that first play in the red zone was awesome. And then Purdy gets sacked on 2nd down for a big loss. And then a couple more next play happens, doesn't get a 1st down. Niners are held to a field goal. Jake Moody converted this one, makes it a 13-10 game. The Bucs' next drive, they start finding some success with that ground game. Now, in this one, they weren't ultimately very successful on the ground. When I look at their stats on the ground, they finished the game with 110 yards, but it was a better ground game than the Niners were running. However, there was a few more play calls that were made on the Bucs side versus the Niners side. This was a pass-heavy game for the 49ers. It didn't feature a lot of ground game. In fact, there was only 13, I believe it was 16 ground calls, so running plays that were actually decided before the snap happened. Obviously, Purdy took off on 4 plays to get us some yards. But to think you've only called, at this point, 16 carries on the ground, or it's 18, excuse me. 13 featuring Christian McCaffrey and 3 with Deebo, and then 1-1 for Isaac and Jordan, which is interesting. I'll talk about that this week with Marcos. But the game plan going into this was throw the ball for the Niners. So getting back into it, the Buccaneers started finding some success on the ground game, and Bosa's not getting his pressures like normal. The Bucs were doing a great job in this game, really containing him and keeping him, where Baker was able to operate. Because as everybody knows, if Bosa gets going, if he gets pressures, and you start to feel that as a quarterback, you start making mistakes. And that presence, that pressure wasn't being felt throughout this one in the first three and a half quarters. So shout out to the Bucs for that. Good game plan, even with their star left tackle going out against a really good Nick Bosa. The Niners were then struggling to tackle Bucky Irving and company at that point, leading to, in the start of the 4th quarter, a touchdown for the Buccaneers. They make it a 17-13 ball game. So this was tough. At this point, as the Niners, you got to go down and you got to convert. You've got to get points of any kind. So big first play for the Niners to Kittle for big yards down the field. The Niners then are on 3rd and 9 and are held short. And that forces a field goal from 50 yards. And Jake Moody pulls that one left again. So that's the second missed one in this game. And it's 6 points now that he's let up on the board. If he converts those, it's 19-17 Niners. But at this point, it's still 17-13 Bucs. So the Niners then have to make a play on defense because you're inside the 4th quarter. You don't want this game to get out of hand any more than it already is and feeling like it is. So the Niners then hold to a 3 and out. And Jacob Cowing, after a big special teams muffed punt earlier in this game, he returns a punt for a good chunk of yards, setting up great field position. Next play, start off the drive, big shot to CMC, and then Brock gets hit late for a 15-yard penalty. We're back in the red zone. We're back in business. First play to Juwan Jennings, incomplete. Then, setting up another play, who else? George Kittle. And an amazing ball from Brock Purdy off a scramble drill. I think he held the ball for like 8.5 seconds before finding George Kittle in the back of the end zone. And George just continuing to be the man for this Niners team throughout this red zone era that the Niners are in right now. I mean, I don't have any of the stats pulled up, but when I did analysis of the red zone earlier on this season, George Kittle was the guy. Like, that was the guy you leaned on throughout this season. And he's been the most available on this team when I look at a health standpoint too. So there could be some kind of chemistry there. Obviously there is chemistry there, but there could be something inside the red zone that, you can really rely on when it comes to punching a ball in or at least getting a conversion to keep that red zone presence alive. So shout out to Brock for a great ball and just an amazing catch by Kittle. So that gives us the lead again. The Bucs on their response drive, they're forced to punt. And it was perfect. It was a massive sack by Nick Bosa, who sets them way back. They're forced to punt. You can't even think about, going for it at that point. It was exactly what we needed. And Bosa, who has been struggling all game long to finish plays, finally finishes that play. And so at this point, I'm like, okay, we've got the momentum. The Niners go on this, next drive. You can essentially ice the game with a touchdown. And with a field goal, you're then forcing the Buccaneers to punch it in for a touchdown on their next drive. So it makes it that much more pressure of a drive. And you're putting the pressure on the Bucs to go out and execute when they have all these injuries and inconsistencies offensively and even defensively, but mainly offensively so far, in this game. So the Niners to ice the game, Purdy under pressure hits Deebo in space for a massive gain. Then the next play, Purdy fumbles. And that was scary because you see the ball hit the ground and it's like, oh boy, this felt like another one of those Niners things where this season, it just seems like the story is like something goes wrong after you just need to execute one thing right. And ball hits the ground. Juwan Jennings makes an awesome play, jumping on top of it, saving it. And then we're forced to a field goal. So you can still get points up here, but Moody misses his third field goal of the game. Bucs response drive, they go down, field goal to tie. That makes it 20-20. The Niners are then forced to go down the field with a little over a minute left and try to get any points for the win. First play is a quick out route to Jennings for 6 yards. Then another quick out route to Pearsall for a first down. Big play Ricky, Slick Rick. Shout out Slick. Purdy then to Ricky and then to Jennings, opting to stay in bounds up the middle, setting up a spike with 3 seconds left for Jake to win the game from 44. Jake, who is three missed kicks at this point, going for the game winner. You can't help but think, like, if I'm out there, that would be on my mind. I've missed 3, and I'm going from 44, where I've already missed one similar to that, to win the game. There's already pressure, and now there's even more pressure. But he ices the game, and he knocks it down. Niners win 23-20. So, look, the Niners got the win, and that was what mattered, right? But when I look at this one, special teams continues to be an issue. You have the muff punt, and you have the 3 missed field goals by Jake. And it's like, you left 9 points out there, Jake. This game wouldn't have even been close if you could have executed on your field goals. And obviously, there was a 50-yarder involved in there. So, I mean, it's not easy to knock down a 50-yarder, right? But you are paid to kick the football. And so it's frustrating from that standpoint to think about how many points we left out there, offensively from not just a field goal perspective, but also in the red zone and not executing. On top of that, special teams just throughout this season has been the reason that we've lost a number of games. And in this one, if the Niners would have lost this one, it would have been the same story. Special teams, once again, costing the Niners a key game that they needed to win. And so, shout out obviously Moody for knocking down the big one, but that needs to get addressed. We need to figure out what's going on with these special teams woes. I mean, they're in a funk right now for the entire season. You need to make some plays and you need to get right because you're not setting your defense up for success. You're not setting your offense up for success. It's been rough. You've had to overcome a lot of that. I do want to talk about real quick the last drive for the Buccaneers, where they would have gone down, and if they scored a touchdown, it's essentially over. Obviously, the Niners held them to that field goal to force the tie. There was 4 penalties on the Niners on that drive alone, and one of them was a bad call. The other 3, you just can't have that. And then on top of that, you missed 4 sacks, 2 of them coming in one play, and then for Nick Bosa to be essentially tackling Baker for like 2 seconds and then Baker to still make an incredible throw for a catch and a first down to keep the drive going. It was just backbreaking and frustrating. So that, just to be able to hold them to a field goal, I want to highlight that, but you need to address those penalties in the later stages. This was a pass-heavy offense for the 49ers, and it's part of the CMC effect. I'll talk about that a little bit more this week on the episode where Marcos and I can talk about it. But for this game, I mean, the Niners threw the ball 36 times. And like I said, they only rushed for 18 planned. So Juwan Jennings had 7 catches, Ricky 4, Christian McCaffrey had 6, Deebo had 5, George Kittle had 3, all of them going for over 50 yards. So it was a big game from a receiving standpoint, and it's also good to see considering we don't have Brandon Ayuk. We saw some execution from obviously from Ricky Pearsall, who's stepping in there and taking the brunt of what we're missing from Brandon Ayuk. So on that note, I do want to give some credit, and I'll move on to my game ball here before I finish up, to Brock Purdy. 25 for 36 for 353 yards, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers. Obviously got a little bit lucky with that one fumble, but Jennings, like I said, saved the drive and potentially saved the game in a lot of ways there. And then Purdy just continued to make some big time throws, and he led that game winning drive. He made some key throws late stages in this game and took advantage of the check down opportunities. And I know that, you know, the story for him for the better part of his career has been the check down merchant, which is just completely untrue. And it's like, if you look at all his stats, it doesn't even make sense why people would say that. But in this one, to actually have the ability to check down the ball to Christian McCaffrey in the middle throughout this game was massive, because it opened up the rest of the pass game for the Niners. And on that note, Christian McCaffrey gets another game ball. 108 all-purpose yards, 40 rushing, and 68 receiving. No touchdowns, but his presence was felt. And it's so good to have him back. Run CMC, and this one catch CMC. And he had a couple really good runs early on, and just in general throughout this game. But the timely plays and the big catches that he made, just continuing to prove why he was the offensive player of the year last year. And for all the people who drafted him number 1 overall in fantasy, welcome back. You probably are going to have a good week this week. So it's good to have him back for sure. Last game ball is going to go to George Kittle. 3 catches for 53 yards and a touchdown. But all 3 of his catches were massive. They were yards after catch on 2 of them, and just taking hit after hit. I mean, forcing 4 guys to tackle him, and then obviously that great touchdown. So ultimately, when I'm in conclusion to this game and I look back at it, it's a rough win, but it's a win. You got to win in Tampa Bay, where, I mean, the Niners were struggling to find momentum in it. And shout out to the Bucs. They played honestly, it was a gritty, but they played a good game. And they hung in there. Baker made some great plays considering he was playing through an injury. Bucky Irving was playing through an injury, and Bucky Irving was his presence was definitely felt as well. I mean, he had 70 yards on the ground in this game. Rashad White adding 31 more yards on top of that. But Bucky's 14 carries, all of which it took 2 guys to tackle him. So the tackle issue continues to also kind of be a thing, especially in the second half. There's something going on with this Niners team in the second half where I don't know if it's you know, a lack of fitness, being in shape. At this point, it shouldn't be, but they're missing tackles in the later stages of the game. They're having some mental lapses. So things that the Niners kind of need to adjust and fix as we get into the later stages, where you play some tougher teams in the coming weeks. But you get the win in Tampa Bay. You're looking good after the bye. That's all that mattered. Now you've got a divisional game against the Seahawks next week at our house. And it's time to ice them, take them out of the equation. Let's get rolling. Bang, bang, Niner gang. Let's get it. So I've been Benny the Jet. I appreciate you guys for listening. This has been the Post Game Pod for the 49ers, Week 10. All of our links to our socials are down below in the description. And be sure to check us out later this week when Marcos and I record and talk about his game, our game, and some Kings. Appreciate y'all. Love y'all. Jet out.